Thank you, Frank. If you guys think that election cycles last a long time, try running for the water district. I've just spent the past year campaigning for an election that didn't happen and got pushed until next year because the incumbents wanted to give themselves a 5-year term instead of a 4-year term. The court said, well, I guess there's nothing we can do about it. But that said, how many of you guys think water is important? I'm pretty sure everybody's going to raise their hand, right? If we don't have enough water, we've got big problems, right? We've got a drought, and that's one of the things we're facing. We also have problems if we have too much water, right? And in fact, the origin of the Tarrant Regional Water District, that's where it comes from. Back in the 1920s, there was a huge flood along the Trinity River that flooded a lot of Fort Worth, a lot of property damage. And well, I would have preferred a far more free market solution myself. And, the government never missed an opportunity to create another bureaucracy to solve problems. And so the Commissioners Court created the Tarrant Regional Water District for two purposes, as Mary kind of mentioned earlier. Flood control along the Trinity River and providing clean sources of raw water to the residents in this area. And to do this, they levied a tax of 2 cents on every $100 of your property. As with all good government bureaucracies, it didn't stay that way for very long. As Mary mentioned, now, look at what the Tarrant Regional Water District has done. They own a deer lease, they own a skating rink, a restaurant, a brewery, countless other things that have nothing to do with flood control and providing water. In fact, most of these things actually consume water. They've got into the business of economic development, and we can spend a whole evening on the Trinity River Vision. But how did this happen? Things like this don't just happen overnight. It happened because people don't pay attention. And any politician likes to slide things past you, right? We all know what's going on in Washington, D.C. We watch Fox News, we see what's happening, we know what the president, we know what Congress is doing. But to the state level, we know that the Democrats are trying to take Rick Perry down over, using his veto power. We see a couple things happening like that. But a lot of times, we don't pay attention to the little things that are going on. So for something like this, a water district designed to protect your water, to suddenly become this monster of taxing and eminent domain and wasteful spending, how does something like this happen? First of all, somebody has to open the door. That man was Charlie Gehring. In 2005, he passed House Bill 2639, and here's the exact words from the bill, that expanded the authority to include environmental restoration, recreation, access and green space, urban revitalization, and economic development. What does that sound like to you guys? Agenda 21. So now that the door's been opened, Charlie Gehring, they put this on the local and consent calendar, which means it didn't even come up in the legislature. Not one representative probably even knew that they had voted on this. It seemed harmless. So once the door gets open, though, somebody's got to back up the truck. And that was our esteemed Representative Kay Granger. She went, the court queen of Congress, came in and said, I'm going to back up the truck so I can fund this thing with federal money. Right? And just to make sure that everybody's keeping a good eye on this, she put somebody really responsible in charge of this project. That is right, her son, J.D., who has absolutely no experience managing projects of these size, is now getting a 6-figure salary working for the Trinity River Vision, which actually doesn't have to bring things before the voters. So this back to, I was at a meeting the other night that they were talking about the Trinity River Vision. In fact, Don was there, and they had talking about these 3 bridges that they're going to put up as part of the Trinity River Vision. They said, hey, it's $65 million in federal money. It's not your money, it's federal money. Now, imagine if instead of me, a Tarrant Regional Water District candidate here, talking to you tonight, imagine if I said, nice to meet you folks, I'm not going to try to do an accent, but I'm from the Boise, Idaho Chamber of Commerce. We're trying to revitalize our area by putting in an amusement park. And I'm here tonight to ask you guys to vote for a tax increase on yourselves so that you can fund our amusement park in Boise, Idaho. You guys would run me out of the room. But yet that's exactly what we're doing. By saying we need this $65 million in federal money to fund these bridges, we're telling residents of Maine, Florida, Montana, California, New Mexico, Oklahoma, that they're here to pay for our economic development. I don't think that's the American way. So, what's the problem here? As we see, the bill got pushed forward, and so now most of the tax money that you see going into the Tarrant Regional Water District is no longer used for flood control. Ask the residents of East Fort Worth what they think about the job being done on flood control. It's not being used to find clean sources of water. Go ask anybody that frequents one of our lakes how the water levels are doing. Ask them where our water's going. You know, it's down in the mud. So where's all this money going? Economic development. Which, hey, I like economic development. I think it's great when we have new stuff. But if you're telling me that the only way that we can have all this nice fancy stuff is if we've got to raise taxes and take money from people by force in order to pay for it, then it's probably not going to sustain itself when it gets done because there's not enough demand for it. That's just simple economics. And so while we're seeing all this money go into these economic development programs, we're not seeing this money being spent on water. And so what we need to do is keep pressure on our politicians, because now their solution, if you guys remember Prop 6, their solution is, well, let's just take $2 billion from the rainy day fund. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I manage my own home finances, we have a rainy day fund. We've set aside 6 months worth of salary in case something bad happens, a rainy day. In case, for example, let's say an economic downturn, one of us loses our job. And suddenly, the amount of money that we budgeted for our expenses, the income doesn't match up. And we've got to fill that gap somehow. That's what the legislature is supposed to do with the rainy day fund. They estimate their income coming in through taxes, and then they set a budget. Because fortunately, unlike the federal government, the state legislature can't print money to close this gap. So they have to forecast for the biennium, how much money are we going to raise, and then say, now we're going to budget that much money for the various programs. Now, imagine something happens like in 2008, where suddenly all those estimated tax revenues don't come in. And we have a huge budget gap. Instead of going into debt, now we've saved money in our rainy day fund. But just like I don't look at my rainy day fund sitting in the bank and say, great, I'm going to go buy a new pickup truck. We shouldn't do that with our rainy day fund in the legislature. And so when we're taking money that we've got, and we're spending it on things that we don't need, so then we have to turn around with the other hand and grab for that money. So what I'm saying is watch what's going on. Charlie Guerin opened the door. Kay Granger backed up the truck, and I don't want to even get started on Betsy Price's role in all this. You know? That's right. So, but how can we do this? As Mary has been working very hard to try and get something done, to try and take Jim Oliver to task over some of the things that he's done, to try and bring some of these secret meetings out into the open. But she's one voice. She's one voice on a board of 5. In fact, and she mentioned that even changed the rules. So she can't even get an item on the agenda to talk about. Even if the other 4 don't agree with her, they can vote no, but they won't even let her bring it up for discussion. Well, we're looking at still a ways out in May to bring that second voice and maybe a third. Melissa McDougall, who's not here tonight, and I are running for the Tarrant Regional Water District Board of Directors so that we can bring that second and third voice, which, as you know, out of 5 is a majority, to the Tarrant Regional Water District. We can stop focusing on economic development. We can stop focusing on raising your water rates so that we can fund our buddies' projects. Instead, we're going to get back to the true sources, making sure people's property is taken care of from floods, and making sure that we have the water that we need for the next 100 years. Because I don't know if you guys have seen some of the stuff going on up in Northwest Texas. There's cities with less than 300 days of water left due to poor planning. That's not going to happen here. I'm not going to let it happen. Mary's not going to let it happen. And I don't want you guys to let it happen. So keep an eye on what's going on. Read the news. Follow this Trinity River vision. Just because something looks really cool doesn't always mean it's a good idea. So I'll leave it at that. I see Frank walking up here. I'm going to take a sip of water that's actually nice and clean here.